my name's Jade and today I will be discussing the books I read in July. I read 7 books in July, 3 non-fiction, 4 novels, a lot of either ancient retellings or books set in antiquity or books about antiquity. I love reading ancient stuff in the summer. Like, the heat just really helps. Speaking of which, please excuse my appearance. We're in the midst of a heat wave. I have the windows open because that's the only source of air. I apologise for any background noise. I also apologise for my hair, but I do think if I had to turn the hairdryer on, I would actually just melt right here, right now, into a puddle. The first book I read this month was Lies We Sing to the Sea by Sarah Underwood. This is a YA historical fantasy. It's inspired by the Odyssey, very much so. Inspired by rather than a retelling. I didn't really properly know what the premise of this one was before going into it. I thought it was a retelling, to be honest, but I knew it was about the maidens that Odysseus kills when he returns home from his Odyssey, and that was enough for me. This is the Illumicrate edition and it is stunning. This was also a big selling point on why I wanted it. It is very hard to synopsize this one. I'm like putting it off, and I think that is a part of the problem I had with this book, which we'll get into later. But we're following 3 different characters, mainly I'd say Leto. Every year, I think it's 12 girls are chosen by Poseidon to be sacrificed because of this whole Odysseus ordeal, and she's one of the girls. But when she's washed away, she doesn't die. She comes back to life as like this creature, and she meets Melantho, who is in a similar predicament. These girls that keep coming back to life are tasked with killing like the kings and the princes of Ithaca, the land in which all of this has gone. Basically, all of this has gone down. And so they have to then go and kill the current prince, and the current prince is Matthias, and he is our other perspective. He has his own situation, and they all want to try and break this curse of the island, but why it's happening isn't 100%, like, it just really doesn't make sense to me. The whys and the hows, they're just really murky. There is a review on Goodreads by Literary Elise, and I think she brings up so many good points about the plot and about how the plot feels unstable and confusing and contradictory. I did end up quite invested in the characters and in their situation. The dynamic is really interesting. It is queer, like I said, it was in the Pride sale. There is something of a love triangle situation. Part of me was like thinking like it's almost like giving poly vibes, really intriguing, really interesting, and I love a love triangle, to be honest, especially if like the characters are somewhat okay with it. But here's the thing, I think there was also ethical conundrums with this love triangle that weren't really hashed out. The end genuinely took me by surprise. I genuinely did not think it would end the way it would. I really wish there was an epilogue. It felt very sudden, and I also think there's just like some general cliches in here. I did enjoy it. There were aspects where I enjoyed it, did become invested. I read a historical fantasy, a YA historical fantasy earlier this year. It was like an Arthurian fantasy, Sister of Swords and Shadow by Laura Bates, and it had very similar problems. Like, the plot just felt, and the magic system and what was actually going on felt so elusive. I'm gonna give Lies We Sing to the Sea either like a 5.5 or a 6. I don't know, it depends on how generous I'm feeling when I'm editing this video. Next up we have a historical fiction, and that is Divine Might by Natalie Haynes, Goddesses in Greek Myth. This is kind of like a sequel type thing to Pandora's Jar, which is non-fiction about 10 different women in Greek mythology, but like mortal women, and then this is the same version but with the gods. We don't have goddesses, I suppose I should say. We don't have 10, I think it's only like an 8. I do kind of wish there were a few more, but it's fine. I could listen to Natalie Haynes forever. So she's a classicist, but she's also a comedian, and I especially love hearing her talk about like the characters and the people. Like, I love Natalie Haynes Stands Up for the Classic, which is her radio show, but it's also, you can listen to it as a podcast on Spotify and stuff, and I love how passionate she is and how like defensive or slash accusatory she can be. And I think she's just got so much great knowledge, but then she always kind of relates it back to like the human side, and like in these two, in Pandora's Jar and Divine Might in particular, she often references like other art they've been involved in and have inspired and how we think about them now, and it feels very cohesive and it all is very easy to understand. I listened to the audiobook of this one, which is narrated by Natalie Haynes, and I highly recommend that. I did that for Pandora's Jar as well. Didn't love the Demeter chapter purely because it was wholly based on the whole Demeter-Persephone relationship, which is important, and I'm glad we had a lot on that. but that was it. We didn't really get many other mentions of her, and I would have liked there to be space of her away from her daughter. It felt like it was a Demeter and Persephone chapter rather than a Demeter chapter. Other than that though, I can't really fault it. I just don't think I feel quite as passionately about it as I did with Pandora's Jar. I would still highly recommend it if you want to learn more about the goddesses and some, or even if you just want to like a different take on them and some factoids that you might not have known. I really enjoyed it. I'd give it definitely an 8 out of 10 at the very least, maybe a 9. Next up, we are veering kind of in a very different direction, and that is A Complicated Kindness by Miriam Taves. I read 2 books by her last year and I adored both of them, Fight Night and Women Talking. I'll link to the videos where I discuss both of them down below. Also down below will be the video where I discuss Pandora's Jar. One is contemporary and it's literary, so it's a very different feeling. But I just was really craving a literary, and I wanted to read more by Miriam Taves, and I thought I'd pick it up. Also, I think all of her audiobooks are on Everand, so if you have that app, you can listen to them. I listened to this one and it's narrated by the author. I kind of maybe wish that I didn't, just because it was a good narration, don't get me wrong, but it was very almost monotone. And I think in a way like it really worked well, and I enjoyed listening to it. It was a pleasant experience. I don't think it was done badly but at all. I just think it really warped my perception of this character, who at times could be quite funny and sprightly, but I kind of imagined her quite deadpan because of the way it was narrated. Following Nomi, she lives in a Mennonite community, and her mother and her sister have somewhat recently-ish left, like one after the other. Her sister went and then her mother went, and it's kind of just about her living in this community, trying to reconcile with what happened. There's lots of flashbacks to before they left. It's just her and her dad now, and it's about her relationship with him. She has a new boyfriend around this time, so it's also about like her kind of, it's very much coming of age. It's very much coming of age, just like in this very particular strange circumstance, and she feels that it's strange all the time. Like, there's a lot of kids in this community that feel kind of like they're living in an outdated system, and it was fascinating. It was really well written. The writing is so smooth and beautiful, and there's so many like little human truths is what I call them, like just those things that you're like, yes, I connect to this so hard, or yes, I know this thing, or yes, we all experience this thing and you've named it and I didn't even realize it needed that up until this point. I think all of her books do that, to be honest. What did my review say? I said I devoured this, loved the stream of consciousness writing style, which is rare for me, but I really loved this. I thought it was really well done. The way we veered from different topics was really well managed, like times where we were more introspective versus times where we were doing things versus flashbacks. It all felt very balanced and it made a lot of sense. I also don't think it was too on the nose at any point. It was really subtle and nuanced. The kind of slow, almost at times horrifying realization of things. Masterfully written. And the characters were fascinating. They truly were. I have a feeling this one's going to stay with me for a while. That's the only thing I will say. Since having finished it, I haven't thought about it a ton. I kind of remember it well, but I don't know if it's because I read it so quickly or because it was stream of consciousness. Like, I definitely feel like there are bits that are more murky to me now. But I mean, the situation and the characters have definitely stuck with me. It's really interesting. It made me think a lot about a lot of different things. Life, basically in general. A lot about religion. Religion's a very big theme in here. About like society and norms and whether we should be true to ourselves or true to like society or true to the fashion or true to religion. Like, there's so many conflicting forces, but also there's a lot of mental health stuff, and Nomi doesn't really know like whether she's coming or going a lot of the time. She struggles quite a lot. I think I have to give it a 9 out of 10. I don't think I can give it anything lower. It was so good. Back to antiquity, we have Babylonia by Costanza Casati. King's Fall, Queen's Right. Costanza Casati wrote Clytemnestra, which was one of my absolute favourite books I read last year. I adored it. I'll link to a video where I discuss it down below. This one we follow... How have I forgotten her name already? No! Semiramis. It takes place in like the ancient Assyrian Empire, which I know nothing about. Also didn't really know, like, based on myth. Was it like a retelling? Was it based on real people? Was it like mostly fictional? Like, I had no idea when I went into this. I do now, and I'm not going to say in case you don't know, you don't want to know. So I definitely now want to like learn more about the Assyrian Empire and the ancient Near East and like Babylonia. So we're following Semiramis. She grows up in this little village. She's desperate to get out. Her mother died when she was a baby. She was raised by this like farmer. I don't think he's a farmer. He's something else, but I can't remember what it is off the top of my head right now. But like rural worker, quite high up within the village, and he's always known that he's like raised her so that he can then marry her off and get money for marrying her off or whatever. She wants to get out. She bigger, better life. She like has this hunger for power. We also follow two other characters. One is the king of this empire, Ninus. I've never said his name before. We also kind of sometimes follow Owns, who, again, whether that's how you pronounce his name, I don't know, who is Ninus. That's what I said in my head. That's what I'm going to say. That sounds the most right. Ninus's best friend, and he's also kind of like the link that helps get Semiramis out of her village. A very interesting dynamic between these three characters. I was obsessed with it. Costanza Casati has like said, I think in interviews and stuff, that she loves like love triangles and hinged threesomes, and I've come to realise that I too really love that. But just like that whole dynamic, like the Infernal Devices, one of the reasons that love triangle is so great is because everyone loves everyone. Like Jem and Will love each other like brothers, and they both love Tessa, and Tessa loves them both, and she doesn't want to hurt either of them, and it's just, and this is similar ish. I mean, I would say they're much more dysfunctional. I'd say that all three of those characters are just dysfunctional in general. But that is one of my favourite things about this one. Like, you get kind of a sense, I think, of this in Clytemnestra, but you really get it here about how morally grey all of these characters are. They're all very complicated, and there's a lot of stuff brewing under the surface that Costanza never really forces too much to the forefront. You kind of just see it from their actions. I would say the writings can be quite cool and detached, and you can feel quite detached from the characters at times, but I was obsessed enough with them that I just kind of imagined what I wanted to imagine to be there, so it didn't really bother me that much. I loved all of these characters so hard. Ons can be questionable, but I really felt like I could understand why he did the things that I felt like that with all of them, why they had the perspectives that they did, how they came to get to this place. They all kind of, to an extent, felt like they were damaged by their upbringing, and so I couldn't really blame any of them for their like moral greyness. The writing was really beautiful, as it was in Clytemnestra. It can be so lyrical and just stunning, and it reads really easy. It never felt like a chore. I just was so excited every night to sit and read it. I really wanted to savor it. I did read it quite slowly until the end, where I was just like, okay, what now? The structure as well, the way it was structured, it split into different parts, and they all feel very distinct, and it almost kind of feels like it rises and then it falls, which I thought was so interesting. And like even within those chunks, they're like split into half kind of as well, and I thought that it was so smart and so well done, and she'd clearly thought about it a lot. It felt so immersive. It felt really like I was there. I could picture everything really vividly. She's just a master of writing ancient retellings, and I cannot wait to see what she writes next. My emotions were so wrecked after reading this one. I do have one slight criticism. It's kind of a spoiler. So if you haven't read Babylonia and you don't want to be spoiled, I would skip to this time when the spoiler will be over. But there's a prophecy in here. I can't remember his name, but like the eunuch says it. And as soon as he said that, I knew what was going to happen. Because I didn't know like the history, and I know there's the argument of, can you really spoil history if it's history? But I think had I not known what was going to happen, it would have been so much more shocking and visceral. I was able to prepare myself for what was going to happen because I knew what was going to, like, it felt like I'd kind of been like minorly spoiled for what was going to happen in the book, and I'd rather have not. I'd rather find out for myself. I think it would have had a much stronger impact on me. And I was also kind of like shouting at our characters, like, how can you not, like, especially our main character, Semiramis, how can you not see this is you? Especially because she had that other prophecy even earlier on in the book. Like, I felt like that was enough. I mean, there is a bittersweetness to it, I suppose, because after part of it comes true and you then know that, okay, the rest of it's going to come true and this is going to happen, that in a way is its own kind of pain. Also, I'm aware that might be a personal preference, so I'm not going to judge the book too harshly on that for the most part. I adored it. I think I'm going to give Babylonia a 9 out of 10. Again, I think I can't give it anything lower. Then next up we have another non-fiction, and that is The Seven Wonders of the Ancient World by Bethany Hughes. I also listened to the audiobook for this one, and it's narrated by Bethany herself, which I would recommend. So this is kind of like what it says on the tin. It's about the 7 ancient wonders of the world, and it talks a lot about like what wonder means and why people did these things and what these like monuments meant to the people that built them, and how that connects back to us because we're all chasing wonder, and how important wonder and history and being connected to one another is for humans in general. And I loved again how she broadens it out and connects it with us and connects it with just like humanity in general. And it was really interesting to learn about all these different places. I do find that when I read non-fiction about like places or things versus people, I am just like a little bit less connected. I do definitely prefer like the people side, but it was still really interesting, and I'm still really glad to have read it and learned all this stuff. There's so many like interesting factoids in here. There's just so much information. Like Bethany just can't help herself like add all the interesting little things that aren't maybe necessarily always relevant, but I'm glad that she included them. Like I still thought they were interesting. I had a big problem with the way it was organized / like structured. I just didn't think it was, I didn't, if there was organization, if there was method to the madness, I didn't get it. And that really held me back, especially in terms of like recollection, like trying to recall the information. Because I really like non-fiction when it's like segmented and there are subheadings, and there's like, even if it like, whether it's done chronologically or thematically or whatever, like a detour every now and then, but like making it really clear that this is a detour and we're circling back now. Like there'd be times where she'd go on a detour and then wouldn't make it clear that she's now talking about the original thing she was talking about, and I'd be like, hang on, what? Places in which she did decide to put a break, they didn't really make much sense. She'd often like amp up to the break, and then there would be like repetition where she'd be like leading up to this thing and then she'd be like leading up to it again. I don't think that was necessary. I also just found that she did repeat herself quite a lot. Like I don't know if it's because of these tangents, but she'd say something and then a couple pages she'd say it again, and then, or like she'd say it in a slightly different way, but something that we very much have just established. And I do think it's down to the way it was organised. Felt like we were kind of following Bethany's stream of consciousness, and without like being in her head, it's hard to connect where she's drawing these parallels from. I just wish it wasn't as repetitive and it was just organised slightly differently. I think it would have made it so much stronger. I think it could have been slightly shorter. I think it could have been more condensed and easier to kind of recall all of the interesting knowledge. So I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10. Next up, we have our last non-fiction, and again, this is kind of a somewhat different genre. We have Emily Ratajkowski's My Body. I've been wanting to read this for a really long time. I think I saw someone online read it and then recommend it, and then I saw someone else recommend it like towards the end of last year. I'm glad I finally got to it. I listened to this one via audiobook as well. It's also narrated by Emily, and again, she does a great job. I really like the audiobook. I would really recommend it. So this is a essay collection. I think it might be my first like essay collection. Like strictly speaking, I can't think of any other book I've read that's been like advertised as an essay collection. And it's about Emily's relationship with her body, as the title suggests. If you don't know who Emily Ratajkowski is, she's a model. It's very much kind of like an inside peer into that world of what it's like to be a model, but also just like how her body is treated by those around her, how she treats her body. All kinds of topics come and go. It is really interesting. I really enjoyed each and every essay, I would say. There were some that I particularly enjoyed. Beauty Lessons, Because Hello Halle Berry, Transactions, Buying Myself Back, Men Like You. Really well written. Was written with a lot of immediacy. Like we were very much rooted in Emily's perspective, and it all felt very real and quite visceral. I will say that this could be a product of the audiobook. The only kind of criticism I might have is that every now and then the writing felt ever so slightly stilted. I think it might have been like the repetition of the eyes and being in her perspective, which is a very hard thing to get around when you are literally writing from your own experience. So I don't really care that much about that, to be honest. It explores a lot of thoughts and emotions that I think women in particular definitely tend to shy away from, and so it kind of forces you to think about them. I don't know, it was really interesting, it was really entertaining, really easy to fall into, I would say, and just kind of like give over and let yourself like be washed with the experience. It's interesting to kind of like see what's your initial reaction. It's very much like a feminist perspective, and then the things that you're like, hang on, that doesn't feel very feminist, and then you have to kind of like go into yourself and interrogate why you don't think that feels feminist. And I mean, here's the thing, like we live in a society where misogyny is so inherent that like even feminists can be misogynistic and sexist frequently because it's so internalized. I find all that stuff so interesting. And I definitely think like the feminism side is the thing that really drew me, like the relationship with her body. That's the bit that kind of I couldn't really connect to. I do wonder if maybe it's written someone with pretty privilege that doesn't fully understand the depth of their pretty privilege, and like the fact that she's like a white, very, very thin, non-disabled woman. There's a lot of precursors for her success that, you know, how much can we control our beauty. The fact that beauty means so much to her, which makes sense because she's a model, it's in her line of work. But I don't know, I've just never really thought about it that way before, so it was really interesting. I'm really glad I read it. I feel like I want to give it a 9 out of 10 because it felt so well done. So somewhere between an 8 and a 9. And then the last book I read this month is one that I finished really recently, like the other night. The Sweet Girl by Annabelle Lyon. I didn't know a ton about this one before I went into it. It's set in ancient Greece. It follows Aristotle's daughter, and that's all I really knew. And I don't really want to say much more other than that. Like, this technical synopsis does go into more, but because it's so short and it takes quite a while to get there, I feel like it's kind of like a relatively big spoiler. Kind of ends up having to make her own way. I suppose we can say this happens relatively early on. Obviously Aristotle had a relationship with Alexander. When Alexander dies, the Athenians turn on Aristotle and his family flee. And it's very much about Aristotle's other family members as well. And the plot is so random. And it feels very episodic. Like in the beginning it's this like family life, we have to move, but very much so rooted in like, I'm the daughter of Aristotle and this is my experience, kind of like somewhat coming of ages. And then we get to that point where she has to start looking after herself, and it kind of feels like, okay, she does this for a while, and then she does this for a while, and then she does this for a while. Like, what weird thing can I make her do next? There was one point where something happened and I was literally just like, what? There's something that's kind of murky, and I think most authors, when you're writing about this time period, you have to make a choice of like how much of the gods can be present. I was just really confused by this author's choices. I'm not going to say any more. Yep. It also feels kind of anachronistic. It's written kind of in very modern day language, and there are just some like references and some things that happen that feel very modern. I don't necessarily know if it's a matter of the fact that it's not well researched. It very much felt like there'd be little like blobs of like Aristotle's theory here and there. I've never read Aristotle, so it felt like I couldn't really tell, but it did kind of feel a bit like info dumpy. It felt hard to really kind of sink into the time period a little bit because of the anachronistic stuff, but for the most part it wasn't too bad, to be honest. I just would prefer if it hadn't have been, but it suited our main character so well. On the other hand, I don't know, and I think there's examples of it being done well. Like The Silence of the Girls kind of has that writing where it's a lot of like our modern day language is being used and kind of colloquial language is being used, but it really works in that one. And this one, for some reason, it jarred with me a little bit, and I've seen other reviews say the same. Was it enjoyable? Kinda. Yeah, it was very easy to read, very big font, very short, lots of like little breaks, not very many big breaks, like one scene just flows into the next. It's very easy to kind of just flow through in that way, and it is relatively entertaining. I will give it that. I think I'd give it a 6.5 out of 10 because it's like how farcical it is in and of itself was entertaining, to be honest. Those were all the books I read this month. If you've read any of them and you have any opinions, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what you thought. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing morning, afternoon, evening / night. My name's Jade. I hope I see you again next time. Goodbye!